How you doing, guys? Today we are starting the reassembly of my 1955 Wheelhorse Senior engine. Specifically, it is a 1955 Wisconsin AEN motor. Now, I typically, when I do engine builds, I have an initial video which shows you all the bits and parts that are going into the motor. On this one here, I'm going to hopefully make it a little bit shorter than I typically do, and I'm just going to show you what we're going to work on today. The valve train, that's what's going to go back into the block. So let me go ahead, let me get this camera flipped around. We'll take a look at the parts for the valve train, number one, and then number two, I'll talk about what I had the machine shop do a couple months ago. So I have the engine block up here on the workbench. Everything's been cleaned and wiped out, blown out, sprayed out. It's as clean as I'm ever going to get it. Let's put it that way. The machine shop a couple months ago bored the engine 10 over for me. They put 2 new valve seats in. They put 2 new valve guides in. There was a big rusted in elbow here. They heated that up, pulled that out for me. And then I also had the crankshaft turn 10 under. I'll talk about the crankshaft and the rod and bearing shells that are going to go into, and the measurements themselves, in another video when I get to the point where I'm going to put the crankshaft back in the motor. For today, it's the valve train. Valves, you know, everything that's associated with the valve train itself. So with that being said, new valve seats, new valve guides have been put in the motor. I have 2 brand new NOS valves, and you can see the machine. That's the other thing too. They ground the seats and did the valve job. So you can see that is striking perfectly in the center of the valves, but we have 2 new valves. We have 2 new lifters, 2 new valve springs, a new camshaft, because the cam lobe was pretty wiped out on my original. I did swap over the governor weights to this camshaft, and the camshaft itself came with a new pin, so we'll make sure that's all cleaned and ready to go. The pin goes from the PTO side in, oh, excuse me, this is the yeah, is this the PTO side? I can't keep, yeah, no, that's the PTO, sorry. My mistake. PTO side through to where the flywheel side goes, and that's over here. And then there's these little 5/8 caps that go in. So new caps, new lifters, new valves, new valve springs, cam, pin, and the keepers and the retainers I'm going to reuse from my original motor. So first up is to go ahead, make sure everything is super clean, squeaky clean, and we'll get the ring compressor and the valves, and we'll get those installed. Okay, so I have everything super clean. Wiped out the lifter bore, wiped out the guides, made sure the seats are all clean, wiped out the bore, blew it all off with air. The other thing I did was I went ahead and cleaned the valve. This is a brand new valve, but cleaned it, wiped it all down, made sure there's no lapping compound left over or anything to that effect. One thing I like to do is I like to dry fit things for the most part, not everything, but in this case I'd like to make sure. So this is the valve that's set up for the intake, so I'll go ahead and just put it down the guide. One thing is catch it. Don't let it slam on the seat. Bring it down, you know, just actuate it a little bit, wiggle it, make sure I don't feel anything that would cause, there doesn't appear to be any burrs or anything to that effect. So this should be all set. The other thing I would like to do, or what I would do with this is, because we're going to reuse the retainer and the keepers, I just want to make sure there's no issues with that. So I'll go ahead, just lightly affix the keepers in the valve itself, and then bring the retainer up, and just make sure that, you know, it all, it fits all nice and smooth. There's no baloney with it. Give it a little bit of a tug, just make sure there's nothing there. and it's gonna work fine because it's actually press fitting a little bit already. All right, so with that, and then the spring's brand new. So I'm going to go ahead and get the ring compressor. I do like to put a little bit of bearing grease on the stems of my valves, especially in these kind of engines. And also a little bit of grease in the groove. That kind of helps the keepers to fall into place while you're unloading the spring pressure onto them. So with that, we'll make sure everything's good and clean. We'll get some bearing grease and we'll install that intake valve. As you can see, I'm going ahead and just putting some bearing grease around the stem of the valve, giving it a little twist to make sure the grease gets flowed everywhere. Just make sure everything looks good. There's no burrs, nothing's going on. Compressing my spring with the retainer, getting it in place. I'm going to go ahead and flip this engine over. That way the keepers kind of fall into the retainer itself. I did kind of slip up and drop one as I was installing it, so I had to go to the toolbox and get my little magnetic screwdriver to pick up right there, that's where I'm going, to pick up the keeper that fell out, realign it, kind of jiggle it, get it into place, and then undo the ring compressor, applying the pressure to the valve itself. Everything looked good, so we're going to move on. All right, valves are in. Everything looks really good. What I like to do is take a screwdriver and just actuate the valves, make sure they move, there's nothing wrong. In this case, for this engine, instead of having a screwdriver like angled like this, I want it to be a little straighter. So I got this little aluminum block. If we go ahead and gently put this big screwdriver in and just give it a little push up and down, and that feels really good. There doesn't feel to be any issues. I'll just move this little aluminum block over. We'll go over to the intake valve, get in place, give it a little bit of a thing. Everything feels really good. Nice, even spring pressure. All right, next up, we're going to go ahead, flip the motor over, get the lifters in, and we're going to start installing the camshaft. I have the lifters ready to go. They're all clean. Now, typically, if you're going to reuse your lifters, you want the intake lifter to go back in the intake guide, as well as the exhaust back in the exhaust. We're using 2 new lifters and a new camshaft. So with that being said, it doesn't matter which one goes in where. Going to just use some, regular assembly lube. Going to lube up everything, drop them in and out, get that all, make sure that the assembly lube is throughout the lifter bore, so that way it's all nice and ready for initial startup. I did put this little wire tie right here just to hold the oil pump plunger up while I try to finagle the camshaft in. So let me go ahead, let me get this lubed up and installed, and then we'll get ready to install the camshaft. With the lifters in their bores and assembly lubed, we're good there. Next up is to install the camshaft and the governor, or the governor actuator, whatever you want to call it. One of the things we have to do is see how these weights go on the inside of this piece. Whoops, that is how we got to get it in there. So this thing goes just on the other side, then the camshaft. This thing rides on this. So it's a little bit of a, wiggle and jiggle and get it in there. I am going to have to assembly lube the pin. That's why I have this tape here. So as I'm driving the pin in, assembly lube's going to leak out everywhere. I just want it to kind of go on the cardboard because eventually I am going to paint the block. So try to keep the assembly lube mess to a minimum. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and lubricate the pin, line everything up, get the governor sleeve with the governor slide in place first. Then I'll take the camshaft, drop it down through the bottom, slide it into place, and then drive the pin across, hopefully holding everything together. One thing is I am going to want to try to aim it so it's the camshaft's in the neutral position, so that way it just slides right over the tops of the lifters. All right, let's try to get this all done. One thing I forgot to mention is right there, that is the cam pad, and there's an opposing one right over here on this side. Make sure you put a little bit of lubrication on that because the camshaft obviously rides on that. The other thing too is if you notice there's a slot at the bottom. When you flip the engine block over, that slot is on the top. That's what actually, and there's one on this side here, and there's one on the other side, and that's what actually feeds oil to the camshaft. Unlike a Clinton or a Kohler, there is no oil hole or oil feed drain or feed hole in the camshaft. It feeds oil at either end. So make sure that those are clean and they are pre-lubricated. Cam is installed. Actually, you know what? Let's use the bigger light so that way you can see exactly what the heck is going on. There we go. Whoa! Let there be light. So there it is. The governor's weights are in place where they need to be. The governor's slide is there. All of that is lubricated and ready to go. The lobes and the tops of the lifters will get lubricated once I get the crank and the piston back in there. I'll also lower the oil pump rod down. That'll get lubricated. The main pin is lubricated. The slide is lubricated. Everything that you can't get to from the top side has been lubricated. So that's all set to go. Next up, I need to put the brass cam plugs in. I went ahead, cleaned this all off with brake cleaner. I'm going to go ahead and the plugs are right there. Basically, just put a plug in there. It kind of slip fits, and then just take a little punch, whack the center of it just to deform it so it kind of like spreads out and crimps in. I am going to put a little bit of Permatex around that edge just so it won't, I'll hope that it won't weep oil out of it. And once we get that done, the valve train is installed. Oh, the other thing too I did was I made sure that my timing marks, which are right there, are on this, it's on this side. So that way it's just going to make lining up the crankshaft a little easier because I could just rotate this up to about this point, bring the crank right in, and the timing mark should line right up. Okay, so let's get those plugs in, and we'll take one more overview of what we completed today. And there we go. The valve train in the senior engine is back in the motor. Let's take a quick look in there. Camshaft, lifters, the weights. I took the zip tie off of the oil pump rod, so that thing is all set to go. Everything looks A-okay in there. The plugs look good. Let's just turn this around. That's tops of the lifters. If you hear that, there's plenty of room there so we can set the valve lash. I'll do that later, but the springs are in place, keepers, everything looks good. Come over here, and there's the last plug. So I think that looks pretty darn good. I'm still waiting for a bearing shell to come in for the rod. Hopefully that'll be here tomorrow, and then we can start talking about clearances, the rod, getting the crank all ready to go, which is in the bag, and start installing all of that. But until then, thank you guys. Thank you very much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed this. Maybe I showed you something that you can use in the future on your engine, or maybe just make a comment below. Maybe I should have done something a little bit different. In either case, thank you very much for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. And as I said in my little live feed, we will be doing a video coming up, which will hopefully lead to an interesting topic for a live feed. All right, guys, thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it. Have a great day.